Thank you. My screen says my screen is sharing is paused, Eloise. Is that the case?
No, we can see your screen. Well, I can.
Okay. Can I just ask anyone who's got the camera open, give me a thumb up if they can see a picture of the South Downs? Good, good. That's great. Okay. Well, thank you very much for those kind words, Eloise. Um, yeah, I discovered some time ago when I first moved to Sussex after leaving the Air Force what a wonderful landscape we had here. I'd been taking photographs throughout my flying career. Um, but it was really took off once I retired about 7 years ago. I started exploring the South Downs and discovering what wonderful wildlife we had here. And invariably, being a bloke, I invested in a better and better camera. My wife's actually on this tonight, so I won't go on too much about that. But yeah, so a lot of what I want to do is wanted to do was photograph wildlife. And I've been very lucky. This photograph of a brown hare, for instance, I took up on the Norfolk estate. Just wandering around the downs with a good camera, taking your time, and just seeing what's out there. And I've just, really taken what I think are some pretty good photographs, and I hope will establish my credentials. This is a yellowhammer that I took up on the South Downs Way. There's a
David,
band.
the
Yeah.
screen hasn't shifted to the next images. I don't know if you want to try again.
Okay. I'm so sorry. I don't know why. Let's try that once more. Uh, let's try that. Technology. Can you see a banded demoiselle?
Yeah.
Okay. Good. All right. Oh, sorry. So here's the yellow hammer then. Is that the yellow hammer? Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there's a banded demoiselle I took over the River Rother as well. And a couple of linnets up on near Chantry Hill. One of my favorite photographs I've taken. This is a dark green fritillary and a corn bunting. But when I joined the Friends of the South Downs a couple of years ago, I started going for walks with men, walk leaders, and I suddenly discovered places that I'd never been to before. And I wanted to do some landscape photography, but taking another lens up onto the South Downs was a right pain in the neck, and swapping them at the when you needed to meant invariably you missed a wonderful piece of wildlife shooting past. So I had a bit of a light bulb moment and realized that actually um, the camera in my back pocket was just as good, for taking landscape photographs. So I started exploring that. I got a better camera, a better iPhone, and learned how to use it properly. And I started finding that I was getting some quite nice landscape photographs, just with the phone that I had with me. This is one I took of Sisbury Ring, from Sisbury Ring, looking towards Chantry Hill. Sorry, not Chantry Hill, to Chanctonbury Ring. Another few views on the South Downs, and all of these I took just with an iPhone. And personally, I think I'm quite happy with those. I don't know what you think, but for me, it was so much better than any photograph I'd ever taken before with an iPhone. So what I'd like to do tonight is just help you, whether you're fairly new to photography or you've got a new iPhone, or whether you're reasonably experienced, just help you to raise your game, learn some new tricks. And I don't want you to go away feeling you've got to absorb absolutely everything I say tonight. But if you go away and you pick up a couple of tips that you can apply when you go out with your camera, that's great. So what we're going to cover then? So the first thing is a little bit of housekeeping. We'll talk about how to clean your lens, and I know that sounds obvious, but it's something that we do neglect. We'll talk about how making sure that you know your phone, the features on it, how it works, and how to get the best out of it. We'll talk about light, focus, and composition, which are the three keys really to taking a decent photograph. I'll do a little bit of editing. I've got a few photographs on an iPad here plugged into my computer, so I can just briefly take you through some photographs and how I tweak them just to get the best out of them. And then finally, we'll do some questions and answers. Okay, so cleaning your lens. I mean, let's face it, if in the old days when we used to wander around with a camera, it would be in a pouch or in a case or hanging around your neck, and we'd have a lens cap on it, and we treat it with a bit of respect. But, you know, a phone goes in your handbag, your jacket pocket, your trousers, and, you know, I don't remember the last time I really cleaned my lens. So can I just, you know, once in a while, when you get your phone out, just give it the once over, because those lenses really are crucial if you want to take a decent photograph. In fact, what you've got there, those three lenses, just in case you wondered, one of them is a wide angle lens. Don't ask me which one. One is a standard lens and one is a zoom lens. You may not have three of those depending on your model of iPhone. So each of those need a clean. The white circle is your flash, and that's also your torch if you have that on your phone. And the black one is really your light sensor. And it's a little bit more than a light sensor. It's quite a clever bit of kit that scans your image and gets all sorts of information for it. But that's enough about that. So if you are going to clean your lens, can I suggest that you use something like a microfiber cloth, you know, one you've got in your glasses case, or if you have got a proper one for a lens, by all means use that. You can use a lens wipe, but a proper lens wipe, and perhaps a soft brush. I mean, you don't have to do this every time you get your phone out, because let's face it, who would? And I haven't. But don't use wet wipes. They're too harsh. Don't use any rough cloths or paper towels, and certainly not anything like glass cleaners. And there is also a lens on the front for when you do selfies. That's that sort of lozenge shaped one at the very top of your iPhone. So give that a clean too. Okay. Another thing, if you haven't got any of that stuff, you can probably use the lining of a trouser pocket or a jacket pocket, because they tend to be quite soft cloths. Okay, so knowing your phone, lots of models of phones out there. Today, I'm primarily going to focus on, no pun intended, on the iPhone, because, you know, the majority of us have an iPhone. But a lot of what I'm talking about is relevant whether you've got a Google phone or Android phone or whoever else makes phones. So it is important to know what model you have so you can get the best out of it. We'll talk a bit about zooming, app settings, shooting modes, and some aspect ratios as well. Now, I hope that doesn't sound too technical at this stage. It's put you all off. I'm going to minimize the sort of the technical talk and focus on practical applications. So, you know, make sure you stay with me. So first things first then, which model do I have? It surprises me actually when I go out and I ask people what model they've got, and they just say, I've got an iPhone, and, you know, they don't know what model it is. Well, I guess, you know, most of the time it doesn't really matter. But if you are going to use it other than just for telephone, if you are going to use it as a camera, it does pay to know which model you've got. So the way to find that out is, you know, the cogwheel symbol on the home screen of your phone. Just click on that, go down to settings, and where my name is there on the left-hand side, that points to my Apple account on my phone. So just tap on that. You'll go to a screen on the right, and that will list any other items you've got connected to that Apple account. So as you can see, I've got a Mac Mini, which is what I'm using now, an iPad, but my phone is an iPhone 14 Pro. So you don't have to follow me through on this. You know, you may get left behind if you try and find all this on your phone while I'm talking. So just, we are recording this. It will be on YouTube if you want to watch it another time, just to catch up on any things you've missed. So what did I do then? Right. So if you go to the Apple website, there is the Apple UK website, and go to the iPhone bit. There is a link to compare models. So I used to have an iPhone 12. So I put that in this compare page, and it tells me what cameras I had, amongst other things. I was only really interested in the camera facilities. So it tells me I've got a dual camera system. This is my old phone. So you can see it's got two black circles, which is telling me I had a main camera, which is just one-time zoom, nothing clever with it. and it was a 12 megapixel camera. We'll talk a little bit about megapixels in a minute. And it also had an ultra wide camera lens, which allowed me to go to half times magnification, which is quite good because it makes things smaller in the screen. So if you're doing landscape photography, then you can get, more in the scene. It's also got a portrait mode, which we'll talk about. I'm not worried about Dolby Vision. That's to do with video, and I'm not planning on talking about video tonight. And down the bottom, down here, you can see these little circles. Don't worry if you can't read them. It's telling me that my old phone had 1x optical zoom. That's basically the lens, the glass on the back, and also 0.5, which was the ultra wide one I was telling you about. But being a typical bloke, that wasn't good enough for me. So I started researching for an alternative phone. And I looked around and I quite liked the idea of an iPhone 14 Pro. It was reasonable secondhand, about £350. And you can see it's got 3 of these black circles. So it's got a professional camera system, 48 megapixels. So it's capable of recording much more detail. It'll, absorb more light. So the pictures are brighter and have more detail. I've got an ultra wide lens as I had before, but I've now got a telephoto lens. And if you look at the bottom, I've got an extra 2 black dots. One says 2x and one says 3x. So what that means is that my telephoto lens is capable of 2x zoom and 3x zoom. And that again is optical. That's purely using glass, not digital, which I'll talk about shortly. It does super high resolution photos at 48 megapixels, which is how you get the really good pictures that you may have seen on other people's phones. It's all got this macro photography, which is quite good if you want to take, say, photos of a plant really close. You can get very close to a mushroom or a flower and get quite good detail and have it in focus. And we'll cover that again shortly. It does have these photographic styles, which I tend to avoid. We can look at that again later, but really I tend to avoid those. I don't really like that. It sort of puts a sepia look in or something similar. So then, having found out what phone I wanted, I bought it, and I then went on YouTube and just typed in iPhone 14 Pro, how to set it up and so on. And I watched a video, and I would recommend you do the same with your own phone. Just go on YouTube. There's loads of videos out there, people telling you how to conserve the battery life, how to improve security on it. But for tonight's purpose, it will just give you some guidance about how to set the camera up for, optimal photography. Okay, so on to zoom then. So what is zoom? Well, it's pretty obvious. I think most of us know what zoom is, but generally speaking, we want to get closer to the subject. But as I've already intimated, if you've got a wide angle lens, you might actually want to get a bit further away, just to get that bit more in the shot. So the best form of zoom ultimately is physical zoom. And what do I mean by that? I mean using your legs. If you get closer to something, it's going to get bigger. You're going to see more detail. So a lot of people I know just don't get closer to the subject. They just stand rooted to the spot and take a photo. So don't forget, within reason, try and get a little bit closer to the subject. Obviously, if it's a landscape, that's not going to make an awful lot of difference. But, if it's an animal or something similar or a group of people, just, by moving a little bit, you might be able to not cut off the arm of that person on the edge of the screen. So that's physical zoom. So if we look at the picture on the left with the rabbits, so that top left rabbit is pretty much in focus. Clearly, you can only get so close to a rabbit before you scare it away. So you've made the most of physical zoom. And now you're going to want to use the optical zoom if you've got it in your camera. And my camera goes up to, as I said, 3x optical zoom. So you can see to the top right photo of the rabbit, that is using optical zoom. The quality is still really good. The rabbit's head has got bigger. And we've got all of the 48 megapixels on my camera targeting that rabbit's head. So the detail is going to be absolutely fantastic. And that's really what you want to use after, you got as close as you can to the subject. Get used to using optical zoom. And if you look at the picture on the right, you can see here, this is a view in my garden. I've got some flowers at the end of my garden. And the 3x is in yellow, which is telling me that I'm using my 3x optical zoom. If I was to go any further than that, then I would be using digital zoom. And if we now look at the rabbit on the left, the bottom left, again, it's the same rabbit as we see it. But if you use digital zoom, you've reached the limit of the lens in your camera. And if you start overdoing it, if you really start pinching that screen, as you're probably familiar with an iPhone, then all you're doing is expanding the pixels that are on that rabbit. So you may actually be able to see that there's little squares. That is a pixel. So it's just an area of the sensor that is sensitive to light and depicts detail and color. So, as long as you're using a reasonable amount of zoom, whether it be optical or digital, you're going to get a sensible sort of photo, particularly if you only really plan to look at it on your iPhone. But if you're planning on putting it on your television, if you've used a lot of digital zoom, then you might start to notice that the quality deteriorates. So the primary, then get closer. Once you've reached the limit of getting closer due to a fence or a river or beachy head, then you should start using optical zoom until you've reached the limit of that. And then if you really need to, use digital zoom. So here are the photos, the flowers again in my garden, and I've used 7.5x digital zoom on that picture on the left. And it may not be obvious to you, but you can see it says 7.5x in the little bubble here. And now I've really overdone it, and I've gone to physical 15x digital zoom. It says 15x in yellow, and now you can see those flowers are starting to deteriorate. But like I say, if you're only ever going to look at it on your mobile phone, it's not necessarily a problem. So I wouldn't want to overstate, that digital zoom is dreadful. It's not, but just bear in mind the limitations. So that's zooming. So now app settings, and I'll keep this brief. Things you might want to do on your phone to get the best out of it. So if you, again, go into your apps on your phone and scroll down until you see camera, at the bottom, you'll see this word formats. So you would tap on that, and on the right-hand side, I would generally select most compatible. So that will allow you to use, or that will create photographs in what's called the JPEG format, which is globally known. It's highly compatible. It makes fantastic pictures, and you'll be able to share that with people on WhatsApp, and you can upload it to eBay, and it just generally doesn't give you any issues if you want to use it elsewhere. If you use high efficiency mode, which is fairly new kid on the block, then that will make the pictures smaller. So if you've got a limited capacity on your iPhone, you might want to think about that. But generally speaking, if you've got a more modern iPhone, they all come with quite large memories anyway. So generally, I would say stick with most compatible. If you've got a pro camera, as I have, if you've got a 14, you probably won't see this photo capture bit at the bottom. But if you've got a 14 Pro, you've also got the option to set Pro Default. So I set JPEG Max, which basically means that I'm going to get 48 megapixels as a default whenever I take a photo, which is, what I really want. I bought the camera for that reason, so that's what I would choose. The option above it, I wouldn't really worry about. If you want to shoot in RAW, which is like taking a sort of a negative, gives you a lot more control. If you subsequently want to use Photoshop, which I don't, that's for you. But generally, I would give that a miss. Okay, so on the newer iPhones, though, depending on, of course, a lot of this depends on what software state your phone is at. I've updated mine to the latest software. You might find a slightly different picture, but all these options are in there somewhere if you're familiar with your phone. So I've got a newer iPhone, and you can see it says JPEG 48 in this top left corner. And if I wanted to change that, I could click on it, and you'll see the screen on the right come up, and I could change it from 48 megapixels to 12 megapixels, which I might do, like I said, if my phone I found was getting clogged up and, was starting to run out of space. But generally speaking, like I say, I stick to 48 megapixels. Okay. Sticking with app settings then, so let's look on the left-hand screen down the bottom about composition. There are 4 options there that I want to talk about briefly. A grid, which we'll cover shortly. You can see the grid on the right. A level is like an artificial horizon. I don't tend to use that because I think I'm more than capable of determining when my phone is parallel to the horizon, and it does just clutter up the screen. So I tend to leave that off. I also leave mirror front camera off, which is for selfies. And I'll talk about that in a second. And this view outside the frame I leave on. Again, I'll show you why I do that in just a moment. So going back to the grid then, if you look at the right-hand screen, you can see that the screen is divided into 2 horizontal lines and 2 vertical lines. And we call this in photography the rule of thirds. And if you talk to any photographer worth their salt, they'll know what the rule of thirds is. So what most photographers are interested in are these points here where the lines intersect, because from an aesthetic point of view, it is generally considered to put your subject at one of these 4 points, depending really on the photograph. So as you can see here, they've put the people in the bottom left point, it's a third of the way up the screen and a third of the way in from the left. And I think you'll agree that it looks quite nice. What I would say from the general point of view is if you have a sky that's more interesting than the land, then you want to have 2/3 sky visible. If the land is more interesting for whatever reason, then you want to have 2/3 of the landscape visible and just leave a third of the sky. There may be no interesting clouds in the sky, so why expose too much of it? And it's always good to put, something over to the left or right and leave a bit of breathing space out to one side. It just helps to sort of build a good aesthetic appeal. So that's the rule of thirds. So I would normally select that on. It doesn't come out in the pictures, nothing to worry about. It's only purely for composition. So that's grid. So this is something I really discovered the other day. This is about mirroring front camera, and it's really only relevant to if you want to take a selfie. So when I go out for walks, I do tend to take a selfie stick because I like to take photographs of the people I'm with and something interesting around. This was a talk I did the other walk and talk up on Truly Hill. So on the left-hand picture, it says mirror front camera on. Now, I normally have it off, and I'll tell you the reason why. That building behind is the old guard room at the radar station at RAF Truly Hill from many, many years ago. And it appears over my left shoulder, as I would see it. But in reality, it was actually per the picture on the right. So that was, mirroring front camera puts subjects back to front, or maybe opposite way around to the way it should really be. No big deal necessarily, because you can actually flip them in when you come to edit if you really wanted to. But sometimes it does matter. If I did a walk out to Singleton some time ago, and I did a selfie in front of the station platform sign, and because I had mirror front camera on, instead of reading Singleton, it actually read not El Niz, which is Singleton backwards, which is not particularly good. So I now turn mirror front camera off for selfies. And the picture on the right was taken with mirror front camera off. That's actually where the building is and how the photo was taken, as if somebody else had photographed us. And if I were to expand, that sort of danger sign you can see there would say danger, and it would say danger, not Reg Nadel. That sounds right, doesn't it? Yes. Okay, good. So mirror front camera off, I would recommend. The last one is view outside the frame. And again, this is one I've only started to use recently. The center photograph that's well lit is the actual shot you are going to take. But this area outside it is what you could perhaps capture if you were to zoom out one stop. So I've got this at 1x magnification. I've just picked the camera up, I've put it into landscape mode, I've turned the phone 90 degrees, taken a photo at 1x magnification, and I would have photographed the one you see in the middle. But what that's telling me is if I'd gone to 1/2 magnification, if I'd zoomed out, then I could have captured my cat, bottom right, So it can be quite useful when you're out wanting to take photographs of the landscape, to see perhaps what you're missing and what you could include. But I wouldn't get too hung up on that. Okay, next thing is what mode you're going to shoot in. So normally you pick up your camera, don't you? You select camera and it goes straight into photo mode. You can see at the bottom here, it's got photo in yellow, and that is the default shooting mode. That's the one we probably take most of our photographs in. It uses the standard lens at 1x magnification. It's not telephotoed or anything like that. It's just a standard photo, and it's good for still photographs. I'm sure you've taken thousands of them. It also does live photos, which personally I don't like. You may be able to see this symbol here. It's 2 concentric circles. You may have something similar on your phone. That is live photo. I tend to turn it off. It's got a line through it at the moment. What it does, it's actually like a mini video. It captures 1.5 seconds either side of the still photo. So you may have seen photos of people just briefly moving. I'm not sure what the point of it is, to be honest, because it's not really a video and it's not really a still. So, I don't see the point of it, so I don't do it. It's good for portrait oriented shots. So in other words, as you would normally hold the phone, maybe if you want to take a photograph of a person, you're going to hold it that way, or you can turn it through 90 degrees and you can use this mode, for landscape sort of wide angle shots. And the full zoom range is available. You can go 0.5 all the way up to 3x in photo mode. So that's the one we tend to use. Now, this is one I've really only just recently started using, which I really love. And it's particularly good for people because if you look at the photo on the right, which was taken in photo mode, I've captured, in fact, if anyone wants to put in the chat box what they think this fungus is, then they're more than welcome to. I can tell you later if you don't know. But look at all the stuff around it, the leaves behind it, the grass in front. It's quite messy. And it sort of detracts really from the main subject. Whereas I put it in portrait mode, so I just go back to the previous picture? You can just see at the bottom here, it says portrait. So if I were to tap that, it would go into portrait mode, and it narrows the focus depth on the photograph. So it really causes the subject to stand out, to pop, to get what they call subject isolation. So, just try it. If you get too close, it stops you. It tells you move further away. The camera gives you a little message. It says move further away. But, I've started using it and I'm getting some really quite nice photos using portrait mode. The next one is panorama mode. If anyone may have tried it, it's not that easy to use, but it can be quite good for really good wide angle shots. So, if you're out on the South Downs and you've got the whole landscape in front of you, you can use panorama mode to capture quite a wide photograph without being too greedy. So yeah, it's good for extreme wide angle shots. Again, you've got the full zoom range available. I'm not sure why you'd want to zoom if you're looking for a big landscape. So I don't think I've ever zoomed on a panorama shot. And in order to use it, you're going to hold the phone upright, normal portrait orientation. You're going to tap the shutter button to start the camera. And then you're just going to pan slowly, generally speaking, from left to right. I believe in the settings, you can change that direction, but not sure why you would. But so you start the camera at the left-hand end of the scene that you want to capture, tap the shutter button, and then move it slowly around the scene, trying to keep the camera level, maintaining that white arrow here on that yellow horizon. So if the line goes above, if the arrow goes above the yellow line, then you need to smoothly tilt the top of the camera down until the arrow touches the yellow line. And similarly, if it goes below the yellow line, you need to tilt the top of the camera towards you smoothly and slowly whilst still panning. It's a bit of a task. If you can fly a helicopter, you can certainly do this. But the important thing is not to get too greedy. You know, you can't exactly do 180 degrees with this. The camera won't let you. And invariably, the photograph would be absolutely rubbish because, you know, there'd be too many features in the way that would just spoil it. And I'll show you a photo of one in a second of a panorama shot I took. And tap the shutter button to stop. Quite often, if you do it, it's, you know, you muck it up the first few times, so you might have to be prepared to try it a few times. Take the photo, have a look at it. If you feel that you've not gone far enough on the photo in panning, or you've gone too far, fortunately, because it's a landscape, it's not going anywhere, you can try again. So that's panorama mode. But now this is what happens if you're a little bit too greedy and you have something very close to you, like this fence, for instance. This fence, because I'm panning, the lens doesn't really know how to deal with it. And whilst it's not a bad photo, you can see the horizon's level. The edge of the field was actually, I think, a right angle, and this fence was a dead straight line. So I wouldn't say this is poor technique. It's just probably not the ideal situation to use panorama. Or I could have maybe stood closer to the fence, maybe held the camera a little higher and tried it, and it would have looked a little bit better. But it's not a bad photo. But if you really get it right, this is a photo I took using panorama on the South Downs Way, looking east at Bignor Hill during, I think this is Phacelia, this crop, one of those nitrogen fixers. It looked absolutely spectacular. And I haven't really used the rule of thirds there, but I thought the sky was interesting and I thought the landscape was interesting. So, you know, the rule of thirds doesn't always apply. So that's panorama. Give it a go if you haven't. Another one that you could try, and most phones have ultra wide angle, that half-time zoom, is to just put it in half-time zoom, and you can take that in landscape mode. So you can just rotate the camera 90 degrees, tap on the numbers for the zoom, or even just, you know, pinch the screen as you often do. And you can get a picture like that. But it only works on phones with an ultra wide angle lens. And if you haven't got that, then you can just use photo mode, you know, in one-time zoom or even panorama mode. Nearly finished the jargon bit, I promise you. We'll get onto some more practical stuff in a second. So aspect ratios, that sounds a bit scary. All it really is how tall the picture is and how wide it is. And how you can change it. So on the left-hand picture, this is an older iPhone. This is in 4:3 mode. So if you look down here, it says in yellow 4:3, which means basically that this side is 4 units, whatever they are, and the top is 3 units. And a lot of tellies are 4:3, but of course the other 90 degrees out. So that's 4:3, and that's what you get, you know, when you turn your phone on. Generally speaking, one-time zoom 4:3, and that's what we tend to take most of our photographs at. But other aspect ratios are available. If you've got a newer iPhone, then you'll have a menu like the one on the right, and this down here, symbol down here, is, if you just keep tapping that, it goes 16:9, which is like a letterboxy aspect. It will go 1:1, which speaks for itself as a square, and then back to 4:3. It will just cycle through. So back to the 4x3, I said that's the default one. You can use it in portrait or landscape orientation. I'm sure you've all used it, so I won't talk any more about that. 1:1 can be quite good for close-ups of insects, because if you really just want to take a photo of an insect or a flower or a mushroom, you don't really care too much about what's around it. You just want a photograph of the subject. So 1:1 is really quite a good way of doing that. You may also notice this flower symbol here. When you get the flower symbol appear, if it's fitted to your camera, it means it's gone into macro mode automatically. So it recognizes that the lens recognizes how close you are to a subject. And when the yellow flower symbol comes up, that's telling you you're now in macro mode. I must admit, I don't think I've ever taken a macro photo, so something I might do when the weather improves. If you get too close, it will tell you just to get a little bit further away, which is one of the great things about phones, isn't it? They've got so much technology in them. They don't let you screw up a lot of the time. Okay, so that's 1:1. Now this is one I particularly like for landscapes. I can't imagine why you would want this 16:9 portrait oriented unless you're trying to take a photo of a really tall tree, perhaps. But that's rarely the case for me. So if you want to take a photograph of a landscape, my first thought really is 16:9. Just like your widescreen telly, I've got that on 1x zoom here. You can see it says 16:9 yellow here, 1x zoom. And I may even consider going to 0.5x zoom. But just bear in mind, if you do that, you might end up with some interesting sort of artifacts at the edge of the screen where it becomes slightly fisheye effect. But again, that might actually be of interest. So, just try it. But generally speaking, I'll just use 16:9, 1x zoom, and get some quite nice landscape shots. It does say their full zoom is available, but generally speaking, if I'm in 16:9, I'm taking a landscape and I don't really want to zoom necessarily, but it's there. Okay, so that's a lot of the stuff with your phone itself. Now let's talk about the three essentials for taking a good photograph: light, focus, and composition. So I didn't take this photograph. I wish I had. You can see it's used the rule of thirds for the horizon. It's got good light, the focus is sharp, and it's got an interesting composition. So light. It makes sense that without light, you're not going to get a photograph. So my general advice would be to try and avoid bright sunlight. Now, if you're out and about, you can't, it is what it is. But if it is very bright, you might want to wait for a bit of cloud cover if it's available, just to try and take the sting out of the light, because it can be a bit harsh if it's full-blown sun. But generally speaking, we know we want bright sunlight or good sunlight for a photo. And in fact, most good photographers take photographs early or late in the golden hour where the sun is low in the sky, and you get those lovely golden photos. But we're not always up that early, are we? Particularly in the summer and in the winter. It may be sunrise and sunset may be better times of the day, but the weather's not so good. Generally, you want to keep the sun behind you and you want to have it on the subject. If you have the sun directly above and people have got hats on, you're going to get shadows on their faces. You can see this photograph, the tree left of center, there's a shadow right under it. So I must have taken this fairly close to midday. I get there's not an awful lot of cloud cover. That's just the photograph I wanted to get. But generally try and keep the sun behind you and towards the subject. You want to put the focus point on the subject as well for better exposure metering. So I'm going to show you how to do that. You can also use what's called exposure compensation, assuming you have that fitted to your phone. And again, I'll show you how to do that in a moment. And the other thing you can possibly do is night mode if it's poor light. And that doesn't necessarily mean at night, just means that, there isn't a lot of light around. And again, I'll show you how to do that too. So let's go back to exposure metering then. So if you notice on the left-hand picture, I know this is there's no subject there as such, but you can see this left square here with a sun symbol next to it. So every photograph I take, unless it's a photograph of people, I tap what I want to focus on. The reason I say that with people is most iPhones have got subject recognition. They know faces, and they'll select faces, and you can override that by tapping on a particular face. But generally speaking, the phone works it out. But with anything other than a person, the camera just chooses what it wants to focus on, really, somewhere in the middle distance. And it takes an average of the light, which means that perhaps in that previous picture, the one of the tree, that might have become a little bit poorly exposed. So I always tap the subject in a photograph, and that puts that yellow box around it. And that will then give you focus, good focus, which I'll talk more about in a second, but it will mean that the light meter, the light sensor in your phone is based on that subject, which is good because that's probably the thing you really want to draw people's attention to. And if there are, shadows in the tree, then that may help to bring out some detail in the tree. So always tap on subject you want to focus on. Now, if it's still not quite right, the lighting, on the right-hand screen, you can see it says exposure compensation. I don't want to get too hung up on this, but if you really are interested, if you tap on and hold down that sort of sun symbol here, you'll get this vertical yellow line, and you can just drag it, and that will actually adjust the image that you're looking at and give you more light or less light to your own satisfaction. So, again, that's something you might want to try. The other thing you might want to do if it's particularly dark is use this, they call it night mode, but it's also good in low light. Depending on whether you've got it fitted or not, you'll have a symbol in the top left, which will be like a crescent moon symbol. You can either tap on that on old iPhones, or on newer ones, you get this menu. And night mode auto gives you a 3-second shutter speed. So you can imagine if you've got 3 seconds, you're going to have to hold the phone still for 3 seconds. So you need to think about that. You mustn't move the phone, otherwise you're going to get it blurred. But it does prolong the shutter speed. You get more light, and you'll get a better photo. If it's really dark, you can also go to night mode max, and you'll notice here it says it's got a 10 next to it. So that's a 10-second timer. Shutter speed, which, let's face it, who can hold a phone still for 10 seconds? So clearly you want to hold the phone in both hands, probably rest it on something. And you can also use a timer. So this symbol here, timer, I would probably set it for a few seconds, start the timer, select maybe 3 seconds, and then press the shutter button, compose the picture, hold it steady on a fence post or whatever, and after 3 seconds, the photo will be taken. So it eliminates that sort of shake of the phone whilst you're, maneuvering it or pressing the shutter button. So that's night or poor light mode. So that's light. Next thing is focus. So if you notice the picture on the left, there is a prominent feature, the tractor. This was a photo I took on the long furlong on a walk last year. It was a really nice image of a tractor pulling a piece of equipment being followed by hundreds of gulls, and it just looked quite a nice pastoral scene. So if there is a prominent feature in the photograph, tap it so you get that yellow box, and you may be able to make out here you've also got the light symbol, and the photograph looked well composed, so it's going to be in focus and the lighting looks good as well. And then I take the photo. So if you've got a prominent feature, tap it. If that's the thing that you feel you want people to draw their eyes towards, tap that on the screen, get that yellow box around it, and then take the photo. If you haven't got a prominent feature like the one on the right, which is a valley just to the south of Rackham Banks, you may just make out the yellow box here. It's normally suggested that you put your focus point about a third of the way into the picture. And what that does is it gives you a nice wide band of good focus. So The distance will be pretty much in focus, and the near ground will also be in pretty good focus too. So summarize, if you've got a good feature, put the focus point on it. If you haven't got a feature and you just want to take a scene, just put the focus point about a third of the way up the picture. Now we're on to the last element, which I think is crucial, composition. So here we go back to that rule of thirds. So I love the composition on this. Less is more. It's often true of life, isn't it? So don't over clutter the picture. Consider the rule of thirds. Think about what aspect ratio you might want to use. This one is using 4:3. I guess they could have used 16:9, but I don't think it was really necessary. You've got the people and the sun and that lovely sky all together. You might want to zoom in or out, and you might want to consider, photo mode portrait mode or panorama mode. Don't get too hung up on that. The important thing is to get the picture. You can use high-low angles, so you can stand on something to look down, you can kneel down, or you can look up. You can use leading lines, and I've got some examples in a second of all of these. Natural framing, add foreground elements, and it's also important to leave breathing space, as this picture's done here to the right. So here we go then, high-low angles. So the one on the left I took last autumn on Lavington Common near Duncton. So in fact, I think I was lying on my back on the ground because, it just looked such a lovely shot. And I've put the focus point actually on this tree here, because this is quite bright here. And I was worried about how the exposure would look if I didn't tap on something. And I wanted to get some detail in this tree. So I tapped on that. I think that looks quite nice for that reason. I've got around here, you can make out some of the bark, the individual branches at the top. So it's actually quite a nice photo. You can also get down on the ground. This one I got right. In fact, I was lying down on the ground, and it gave me a fairly pleasant shot looking along this path, all these autumn leaves. Leading lines. Lines in a photograph are quite good. I like fences or paths because they sort of lead you through the picture and almost tell a story, like create a journey, as in the one on the right, which is sort of Eric Ravilius like. That's up at Wepham Down. So, you can make some quite interesting photographs with paths and fences and so on. Natural framing. So here on the left, I spotted these fallow deer in Knepp, and they were just popping up between these trees. So I thought it made quite a nice shot to use the trees as the edge of the photograph for a frame. But you can use anything that makes sense. Here on the right, this path would be nothing perhaps if it wasn't for the hedgerows on the right-hand side. So you just need to experiment, use your imagination. Foreground elements. So this picture on the left was at the top of Beeding Hill, and it's a lovely picture of the landscape in the distance, quite a nice sky. But I just thought I'm just going to include this bench just because, it adds a bit of interest. And it's, okay, so it's less than a third of the way up from the bottom, but it's in from the right, and it just, makes it a more interesting picture for that reason. And the one on the left, now we've got bluebell season in May, I think. I see a lot of photographs where people just try and cram thousands and thousands of bluebells into a picture. But if you can try and use a foreground element, as I've done here, focus on that lot, you still get the bluebells in focus, and it just makes for a more interesting picture. And here we are with, like I said, leave some breathing space, particularly if you're photographing animals. If they're looking one particular way or they're flying one particular way, leave space in front of them. Again, it just, aesthetically, it's much more pleasing of this grey partridge here and this brown hare on the downs. Right, nearly there. So I'm just going to briefly take you through editing a few photos. I'll make it reasonably quick because we've actually been going, crikey, nearly 55 minutes now. And be ready for a bit of a shock. There's a photo of me coming up. So what I've done, this is a live feed from my iPad. This is a photo I took out on a walk, and I've actually deliberately toyed with it to make it look poorer than it really was. The sun's behind and out to the left, looking at the shadows, and I'm wearing a hat. and you can see, my face is in shadow. The people in the back, the right-hand side of the face as we see it is in shadow. So you're losing detail there. And so it's not a great photo. So let's see what we can do about it. So this is the edit button. It's got 3 sort of horizontal lines with a circle on it. So on your phone, you would just tap that and it would go into this mode, editing mode. Don't be scared by it, really. You don't have to do this. Most photos that come out of an iPhone look pretty acceptable. But if there's, if you feel like doing it one day, you've got a particularly nice photo that didn't turn out quite right, you can edit it this way and you may be able to just recover it a little bit. So what have we got? Top right, you've got this symbol here with 2 arrows. Oh, sorry, I knew I was going to do that. That's back to my iPhone. That puts it back on full screen with all the editing tools available. So that's what I'm going to do. So down the left, we've got adjust. So when we tap on that, that takes you to all these tools down the right-hand side where you can fiddle with the picture. Filters I never bother with. It's for people who want to put up. If you want to turn it to black and white, I guess you could do that. But if you want to make it look sepia-like or so on, I just don't see the point. And then you've got cropping if you want to just maybe change the shape of it or just cut some bits out. Anyway, so and this red button here, if you tap on that, the picture goes back to what it was originally. So it's totally non-destructive. So for instance, if I do that now, oh, David. If I tap that on my iPad, it says revert to original, but I'm not going to do that. And if I tap the X, it takes me back to the photo I had. So back to edit. So the first thing I would normally do is tap this magic wand symbol you can see here. So that really is what auto, and it just tidies the picture up a little bit. And you can see what's happened there. It's brightened it up. The shadows have improved a little bit. And if I tap the screen, it would, in this case, it doesn't. Let me go back to that. If I tap it, you can see it briefly changes back to how it was before you made the changes. And you can just use the slider up and down as you wish. And generally speaking, you make the photo appear roughly how you want. But there are other tools available too. On this crop on the left-hand side, if I press crop, I can just, move the sides, cut a few things out, get rid of some of the bits I don't really want. And if I don't like that, I can just undo it, discard changes and start again. Anyway, so let's go further down the right-hand side. Exposure is pretty well exposed, so I'm not going to fiddle with that. Brilliance I never bother with. Highlights. So if you've got somewhere in the picture that is very white, like the middle guy in the middle with the blue and white shirt, down the side of his face, it's just a little bit overexposed. So you can fiddle with that. If I go too far, look how overexposed that is. But if I go the other way, you can actually just get rid of that sort of white area on the side of things that are perhaps like clouds, if you've lost the detail in the clouds. The next one is shadows. So if you look at my face, if I move the slider too far, that's lots of shadow under my hat. Now I'm getting rid of the shadow. So you can just play with these tools to your heart's content until you find that you've got just how you like it. Saturation is another one. That's color. I've got possibly a little bit too much red in my shirt or my face, so you can play with that. So I tend to just bother with really highlights, shadow, and the saturation. Let's come out of that. So what I will do, just briefly, I'm just going to take you through a photo. This you may recognize. What I want to do is turn this photo, as it was taken in the phone, to that, which is how it became when I edited it. So let's go back and see how I'm going to do that. And we'll make this the last one because I realize it's been nearly an hour now. So tapping the symbol at the top, make the picture full screen. First thing I'm going to do is try the magic wand. Tap that. That's not bad, but there's bit too much sky and too much field in the front. So I'm going to crop it, tapping that button on the left-hand side. I'm just going to bring the field up to put the tractor, the subject, a third of the way up the picture. And I'm possibly going to get rid of a little bit of that sky. The other thing I'm going to do is put the tractor a third in from the right. So I'm going to drag in from the right-hand side and turn that picture into something a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. I still feel there's a little bit too much sky. That's happy with that. And now I'm just going to go tick top right-hand corner, that yellow tick. So that's not too bad. Anything else I can do with that? I think the trees in the background could possibly do with a little bit more detail. So I'm just going to scroll down to the shadows, and I'm just going to play with that. If you look at the trees in the background, you can see how the detail's coming out in the trees. Look at that. There's no detail at all in the trees there because they're facing north. If I move the slider, I don't know if this is going to lag on your screens, but you might get the idea of it. I can just bring out a little bit more detail, press the yellow tick in the top right corner, and there we go. That's not too far from how I actually ended up. So a little bit of time editing, and you can actually get, recover something that's a bit average into quite a nice picture. I won't do the rest of these. This is one that I took looking south from Rackham Banks. That's how it came out in camera. And through editing, I managed to turn it into that. And the last one, this is one I took not on the South Downs, actually at Leonardslee Gardens near Horsham. It's quite a nice shot, but a lot of shadow. And through playing with it, I managed to turn it into that. I hope you can all see that. So, it's worth editing photos if you get something you really like. For a few moments, you can recover lost detail. So that's the end. I hope it wasn't too boring for you. All I really want you to do is just take away, whatever you want, really. If it's too much, just grab a couple of things. You don't have to employ all these techniques, but I really would like you to just think about the light, where the light's coming from, what you can do to change that perhaps, where you're going to focus, what you want to focus on, and perhaps, composition. Can you just move the lens a little bit just to try and make it a little bit more interesting? So before we go on to any questions, this was free. I wasn't expecting any money from anybody, but if you have enjoyed it and you've got some value out of it and you want to make a donation to the Friends of the South Downs or even join us, then that's the web address there. So thanks very much. And if there are any questions in the chat area, perhaps Eloise, you can read them out to me, or I'm happy to take some verbally as well.
Hi, David. Yeah, more than happy to read out some questions. There are a few coming into the chat, some thank yous as well. So one question reads, is there a facility for the camera to automatically open in portrait mode?
That's a good question. I don't think so, but if you were to go into settings, camera, as I'm doing on my iPhone now, I think there are some preserves. Yeah, there's a preserve. Here we go. There's a preserve setting mode. Okay, so it's under camera, preserve settings, and under there you can, oh, great, good question. Camera mode. So it says preserve the last mode, such as video, perhaps, rather than automatically reset to photo. So if your last mode was portrait, then it would probably go back into portrait mode. But of course, you may not have wanted portrait mode on the last photo, and you would have needed to remember to set it. So, you've got to be careful, I guess, with something like that. But good question. Does that answer your question, whoever that was?
I'm certain that would answer it.
Okay.
I've learned something there.
Okay, good. Any
Oh,
more?
you've got a yes. A yes. There you go. Another question reads, I buy Pixels for photography features, as in Pixels phones, but would love to hear more about the AI features that I don't access. We haven't really delved into AI tools with the camera.
No, I'm not sure I'm qualified to do that, to be honest. And I wouldn't want to get above myself. I mean, I'm sure there's some AI built into a lot of phones. My phone has probably got some built in, but it doesn't have any specific buttons where you can select AI, you know. So I think that person, whoever that is, would have to Google that, or go onto YouTube. You know, YouTube's such a great resource. I think it's is it its 20th anniversary today, or it was on the radio. Um, but yeah, I would YouTube it. You know, people out there know more than I would pretend to know.
No worries. Another question. If you have edited and saved a photo, does the original one still remain?
No, it doesn't still remain, but what you can do is duplicate it. So normally, if you select a photo in on your camera, so if you go to photos mode, select any photo. In the top right corner, there's three buttons, three dots, and you can duplicate it. So it will copy that, and then you can play with the copy. But the good news is with iPhones is that it's non-destructive. So you know, if you played with a photo, and even if you saved it as a heavily modified photo, when you go back into it, you get that red symbol in the top right corner with a circle and arrow, which means you can revert to, you know, how it was. But if you're really concerned, just do a duplicate function and you know, and play with the duplicate.
Brilliant. Thank you. Another question, slightly more technical. Any
Yeah.
advice on managing cloud storage? I presume iPhone cloud storage.
Goodness gracious. Manage it. I'm not sure exactly what they necessarily mean by that. I mean, my computer always backs up to the cloud and stores on the cloud. So my hard drive is actually quite small. So, you know, I do connect to the cloud. I load my photos back up on the cloud, and I actually download them from the cloud. So they're not really stored on my computer. So I've got them backed up on the cloud, and I also have a temporary hard drive, a portable one plugged into my Mac that stores them as well, backs them up. So I'm not sure what else I can really say about that. Um, Make sure, you know, you can back up. I think it's £2.99 a month, and that gives you loads and loads of space on the cloud to, you know, for photographs.
Yeah, that's the option I chose. It seems to be the easiest.
Yeah.
Um, Another question. Best places in Sussex to take photos?
Oh my goodness. Yes. Well, for me, it would be the South Downs. I mean, all over. It depends what you want to take photos of, really. But you know, there's good photos to be had everywhere in Sussex. And I go up to Kithurst Hill quite a lot and Chantry Hill. Um, you know, you've got you know, as long as it's a good day, you've got wide landscapes. You've hopefully got some sun. You might see some birds. Depends what sort of camera you got. If you're just talking about an iPhone, probably wildlife as a rule is not your target because you struggle to take good wildlife photos with an iPhone. But if you are talking purely about iPhone, you know, just get up high is what I would say. Depends what you want, but you know, for me, it's about getting up on the downs and photographing, you know, anything that looks good. And it doesn't always have to be the big stuff. You know, a lot of the time, it's really the small stuff that's interesting too. You know, the small orchids or butterflies, if you can get close enough, maybe they often stand still long enough. I'm going out to photograph some hares in early April, end of March. So, you know, you might be able to get a photograph of a hare with your iPhone on maximum zoom, provided they're not running, of course.
I'm sure we could spend another hour discussing the
Or
best
you could,
spots.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
there's
there's so
Sisbury
many.
Ring, Chanctonbury Ring, you know, all any of Get High is what I would say personally. It depends on the time of the year. I mean, you know, in the autumn, you might want to actually get into the woods. So that's all I can really comment on.
No, that's great. Thank you. Photography in the rain, as a general question, have you had much experience with that?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can do it. I've got with my professional camera, I have a big lens hood. So, you know, that protects the lens. It sticks out at the front. It protects the lens from getting wet, as long as you're not, of course, pointing into wind. Um, so, you know, but if you're talking about an iPhone, I guess, if you've got a hat with a wide brim, you might be able to get a bit of protection from that. Maybe obviously wipe the lens at some point. That goes without saying. And maybe tilt the lens down a little. So get the camera up high and tilt the top of the camera down a little bit, so it's not exposed to raindrops coming vertically above. But I being a bit of a wuss, a fair weather photographer, I don't tend to go out in the rain.
And then this is more of a general question. How to take a group photo with everyone's mother-in-law to eyes open?
Right. Well, take multiple photos for a start. Um, let me see if I can do this now. I think on let's get my camera out. Your, I think if you press the shutter button and hold it down, you might want to Google this. I actually haven't tried it myself, but you can take multiple shots as long as you hold the shutter button down, or the side button if you use that to take photos. So if you press it and hold it down, then it just keeps taking photo after photo after photo.
I've certainly held down the side volume button before, and it's just taken continuous
Oh, that's
shots.
it. Yes, it's the volume button, isn't it? That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah. In fact, I've just done it, and I've taken 30 photos of my foot. So yes, it does work. So yeah, you just press and hold the one. I think it's the volume up button. Just hold it, and you can take 10, 20, 30 photos. I guarantee out of those, one of them will be good composition with their eyes open. The other thing, of course, is if you've got the sun out, is not to have the sun immediately behind you. If the sun is lowish in the sky, put it off to one side by maneuvering the group round. You really probably want the sun facing the subject so that you've got their bodies not in shadow, but not totally facing them. And if the sun's above them, certainly get them to take hats off. Otherwise, you'll end up with shadows all over their face.
And don't let the group disperse until you've taken more than one photo.
Well, that's true. Yeah. I've now got 100 photos to delete.
Okay,
Okay.
well, that's the last question we've got coming into the chat box. I don't know if anyone else has anything they'd like to ask before we wrap up. Just got some more thank yous coming in there for you, David.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I hope you got something out of it, and appreciate everybody joining.
Thank you, everybody. I'm sure you'll all agree with me that that was a really interesting, comprehensive, covering everything that we could possibly need to go out armed with our iPhones. I've learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to putting that into practice when the rain stops, because I can still hear it right now, unfortunately. But yes, thank you very much, everybody, and thank you to David. I'm going to stop the recording there.